Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with a cat standing on my keyboard. Good boy. Peter Robbins here. And again, the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. It is good to be back. And I am actually back in that I was in Pennsylvania this weekend speaking at a conference, the second annual Paracon conference held in Bucks County at the Bucks County Community College, organized by a very talented Eric Mintel and featuring radio host from another station, Eric Mintel, Dominic Sedley, Tom Carey, a scholar and one of the best known and regarded writers on the Roswell case, and for me, Stan Gordon, a colleague I hadn't seen in an awfully long time, and maybe the most knowledgeable person I know, certainly on Bigfoot, not to mention UFOs in that part of the world. But for me, spending time for the first time in many years with former Colonel Charles Halt, now retired from the United States Air Force, who was the deputy base commander in 1980 at the time of the well-known Bentwaters UFO events, and a man whose life I helped to make less than pleasant for many years, believing a contrary story to the one that he is on record with. It was really very moving, and what a good guy who served his country well at a time when all hell was breaking loose on him and around him in England. Tonight's guest is somebody I've known for years, and let me just bring up his intro here. Thom Reed is by any accounts a successful businessman, and on a number of fronts. Among other things, he founded the artist group Miami Models in 1995 with clients Tommy Hilfiger, Nike, Serena Williams, Ralph Lauren, Macy's, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Polo Black Label. Reed also represented the Miami Dolphin cheerleaders, NFL's Michael Rumpf, and L'Oreal. Five Star Productions, underwritten by John Paul Mitchell Systems, offered Reed the position of associate producer for the syndicated television series Today's Health with tennis pro Chris Evert. Reed has also been the subject of documentaries and been featured in Men's Health, Marie Claire, Radio Times, Screen Rant, the Boston Globe, New York Times, and the Roswell Daily Record. After a near-death car accident in Boca Raton, Florida in December of 2005, Thom dissolved Miami Models via a partnership agreement with Anderson Green Entertainment, also known as AGE, located in South Beach, Florida. He has since founded UFO Expo, a celebrity UFO conference and film festival held in Roswell, New Mexico, and Miami, Florida, and Spruce Pine, North Carolina. I've invited Thom to be my guest today, not for the above reasons, as much as for the fact that he and his family's UFO-related experiences over the past 50-plus years are among the best ever documented. So much so that Reed's Berkshire UFO incident of September 1969 became the first off-world incident to be officially recognized and formally archived in the United States as historically true by the office of a governor of any state, in this case, the governor of the state of Massachusetts. The state induction appeared on the front page of the Boston Globe and was covered live by ABC News NY. In 2015, a park was created at the location and a commemorative sculpture erected. The UFO Monument Park is located on Covered Bridge Lane in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and is now a popular filming location for shows including Ancient Aliens, Unsolved Mysteries, Netflix, and the Travel Channel's Museum, and the Travel Channel. The history-making incident is displayed in a great exhibit in the International UFO Museum in Roswell, and Reed is currently a Fox Primetime and News Nation contributor with respect to the UAP hearings and or his Berkshire UFO incidents via Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. Thom Reed, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Wow, that's a long intro. I should just hire you to do that for me all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah, you did your homework there.
It's good to see you, Tom. How go things, generally speaking?
Yeah. Oh, very good. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to be on your show. And we've been friends a long time. We've known each other for quite a while. To reflect on what you had mentioned, I had a lot of contacts in film and television back in the day. And I think after my car wreck, I kind of leaned on them a little bit to get some attention with our family's case. And be honest with you, I never thought it would get to the point that it is, but I'm glad that it did.
Yes, me too. When we first met, I think it was at a conference in New England, and you were doing, at the time, a really classic kind of slideshow presentation. And as somebody that's been involved in investigative work for a lot of years, I really was very impressed by the amount of documentation around the case and the very rather sinister aspect around your father's death and all of the paperwork that you had gotten to back up everything. I'd like to begin where I often do with my guests. I want really the thread that runs through this show for years now here and on my previous network is how do people in public life who we come to admire, respect, dislike, but how do they become the people they are? And in the world of folks whose lives have been affected by UFO-related activity in the paranormal, sometimes that road begins in a very conventional way and jumps the tracks at a certain point. But let's set the scene. Can you tell us a bit about your family and where you were born and your early childhood? It sounded to me, from where you grew up, an area I was somewhat familiar with from my summer camp days.
Okay.
And, the nature of your family, your home, the people, like a pretty idyllic childhood in many respects. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, you certainly would have thought. So, to answer your question, I think our lives jumped the tracks at a very young age. My grandmother, excuse me, was the governess for Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandchildren in Cherry Hills, I think it was, Colorado. And when my mother ended up getting divorced, I was about, I don't know, not even a year old. We stayed there until I was almost 2 years old, and that's really kind of how my mother, I think, bounced back and was able to, because when she left, she moved to the Berkshires. We're from Hollis, Queens. My father's from Patchogue, my mother's from Hollis, Queens, and my grandmother's from Hollis, Queens. I was born outside Albany, but anyway, when she landed in the Berkshires, she wanted, the Norman Rockwell single mother, everything's going to be easy. I get a little restaurant, buy a little house, no problems at school with the kids, right? And nothing could have been worse. I mean, it was terrible because we were outsiders, and where we had moved to, this area in Sheffield, Massachusetts, not far from where the UFO Park is today, that little restaurant she bought, we didn't realize that all these people had moved in from Albany and Hartford and you name it to work at Sprague Electric, which made the goodwill message that was left on the moon, or GE or whatever. Yeah. And NASA used to be in Boston. I think it still is, but NASA was based near MIT, so they were getting all this money, given to them to beat Russia to space, and bringing in all these people to work on a space race, making the medallions and everything else. And so where did they eat on the weekends? They came to our diner because it was down the road from the racetrack, the horse track. And when you come in from Albany to a town that doesn't even have an FM radio station, you go to where you can listen to a jukebox, get the meatloaf special, and go to the track. And so that was how my family met the players they did at a very young age. And so when we were getting harassed in school and everything because of the sighting and everything we experienced, although we were, frowned upon by locals, if you will, we still had a pretty good or solid friendships with many of those who worked on the space race. And one of them who made the medallion, their granddaughter's still on my Facebook page to this day, and they're friends with the family. And so, of course, our sighting came 6 weeks, or our encounter came 6 weeks after the moon landing. So really
to cut you off for a moment, of course, that we're talking about 1969 now. Up until this point, had you had any special thoughts about flying saucers, UFOs? Yeah, obviously, some within the science fiction realm, but had the subject ever really been something that
quite honestly, our first encounter was 66. Our first sighting was 66, which I used to talk about that. We were in Maine, and I was with where I think I first met you. We were kind of camping out. It was like a retreat type of thing. It was kind of fun, actually. But anyway, yeah, so we had our first sighting in 66 and then 67. And that's when we started talking about it at the diner. And that was at the height of the space race. And so that was where the locals would come in with their suspenders and personal tattoos and farming, equipment out front. And they would mix with the more astute coming in from Long Island, New York, or whatever, to work there. And so there was that dynamic. And my mother was getting harassed a lot by some of the, not blackballing anybody, but it happened. I mean, they were coming in with like manure on their shoes, thinking it was funny. You know how it is, right?
Yeah.
So that's how she met my father, because he was like, hey, guys, you want that for here to go? And if you're going to stay here, apologize or take it and leave. And my mom's like, my hero. And that's how she met my father.
Oh.
So, yeah. So anyway, a lot of good came from it.
Again, back when you were that age, and before this really took over a certain part of your and your family's life, did you have any special dreams on what you're going to do when you, as we euphemistically say, grow up? Something we're still working on, but the adult world. Did you see a place for yourself?
Where do I see myself going? I don't know. I didn't really start talking about this until the passing of my father on the anniversary that was mentioned at the UN by a mutual friend of ours, Robert Bletchman. I didn't really know him that well. I only met him twice. Yeah. But, I went to college for computer programming, and, that was the thing, computers back in the 80s and business management, But I had a really unique opportunity. My life has been crazy. I don't even know who I am half the time. I mean, I have gone in so many different directions, and things just kind of fall in line with me. And it's strange because the only thing that's been a struggle is writing my book. So I've been out of school a long time. But to give you an idea, when I first one of my first jobs, I used to set up discotheques in Worcester in the 70s, right? And I used to play that 45, Freak Out. Remember that song, Freak Out? That was my little 45 I used to play. We put in the speakers, the light, lighting and everything. Then I got an opportunity to shoot fashion models for Sage Allen stores, runway stuff. And that was kind of neat, But I got more into the lighting aspect than the actual photography. Then I got hired at the Agora Ballroom, where I met some of the guys from many bands, and thank God, you knew Albert too, because that was a cool interview. But I met Jimmy Vaughn's, and now I'm still friends with his son Tyrone. And so I worked at the Agora as a stage manager. Then I went to Club Med, and I became a stage manager for Club Med. And so my college that I went to didn't really play a part in any of this. It was just that, things aligned themselves in the way that they did. And of course, then I was trained at Omni Penthouse in 1954 Broadway, New York City. And then I took this new slide film type of idea of shooting. People were getting away from 35 millimeter.
Yeah.
And I started shooting in Miami. And then I realized that a lot of these agencies were having to let go their exclusive talent, because this is getting off track, I know, exclusive talent, because they couldn't lock people into contracts anymore if they didn't have or guarantee them work. And so because I was shooting for all these different agencies, everyone knew me. And I said, well, listen, I said, well, we had this idea of, what do you say I open up a management company? You sign them over to me and I'll issue you back a mother agency agreement, which was legal. So within like 12 months, I had 700 people being filtered through my company. And all I had to do was just basically shuffle the paperwork and answer some phones. And so we were making, I don't know, turning $300,000 a year in my second year. Yeah.
One of the most memorable people in your life, from my take on all I've read about you, was your grandmother. And what stories she must have had, being in the position of being the nanny, the governess to the grandchildren of any president of the United States, but certainly Franklin Roosevelt. You were too young at the time to, I think, appreciate the situation. You were like 2. But in retrospect, did she share stories with you about, any interfacing with the president? Or
was that the Bay of Pigs? I think it was. Is that right? Okay. So my mother, I know, was with one of the I can't remember their names actually, but she was the mother of the children my grandmother took care of. My mother had conversations with her on many instances about the Cuba type of thing, and I know that I used to stay. They had like a daycare type of thing that my grandmother had, and I grew up with them. And I remember that she, even in the, I'd say the 80s, still knew some of the kids because they were living in Wellington, Florida. Unfortunately, I think a few of them passed. Actually, I'm not quite sure how, but they would have passed young. But as far as the stories and the things, I think that they felt they gave my mother money. They treated her very well. They introduced her to someone who was with Powers Models, and she did some local, type of work to get some money together. But I think my mother pretty much ended up helping my grandmother out and working there. And then when they decided to leave and the divorce was final, they gave my mom a chunk, which she was able to use to buy the farm and everything. And so with that, they were very close to my family. I think my grandmother went the extra mile for them, and they went the extra mile for us. And unfortunately, we don't really speak to them very much. But another cousin of mine is actually the chief financial officer for the city of Newark, New Jersey, Janelle. And so I've got a very connected family. I kind of grew up in law and politics, and that's one of the reasons I don't get involved in politics. That's a losing battle. But it also played a part in how we were able to get our case recognized as historically true, because there was a lot of locally, I think we had our little battles. Like you fight your battles, but as long as you win the war. And I think we won the war, but there were so many battles that it scarred us. I'm not the person I could have been, although maybe I'm better off. Fighting your whole life. I mean, I got fights in school. I mean, I was beaten up by police officers. I mean, I still have the original articles. Okay, for instance, just to give you a quick little story, and if I'm going in the wrong direction, just tell me, refocus.
That's okay. It's your show. Go off on tangents.
All right. So long after this happened in 69, I'm talking about like 74, 75, we were still living in the area, but we moved to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which wasn't far from our park, but 3 or 4 miles away. And as a kid, we used to work at the Great Barrington Fairgrounds. I'm sure you're aware of it, where the track was and everything else. Our diner was down the road from it. You've been to my park, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And got to get your name in there. Anyway, that's for another lunch, as they say. But so we were at the track. I was there with a girl by the name of Linda Farrell. She is still on my Facebook to this day. She's also spoken with Unsolved Mysteries, and John Andrews. And we were leaving. We were about to leave the fairgrounds. We were actually working. I used to run the bumper cars and different rides now and then. And a horse came crashing through the wall of the racetrack. and it landed like right in front of me, and the horse was trying to get up, and it kept falling back down. It had broken legs. The jockey went flying into the crowd. It was on the midway, and there was lots of people there. Kids were, yelling with their cotton candies, the smell of patchouli oil, people jumping off the stands. I mean, it was a madhouse. And Linda, like I said, is on my Facebook to this day, Linda Farrell. She said they drove the horses here. The track is fixed, right? Pretty much everybody locally knew that, but that wasn't something the police wanted everyone to hear, right? So we were, of course, the police were in front of us, and they to downplay what we were saying as being truthful about the horse track having or being tied to illegal betting was that we were the nutty, UFO family. Don't listen to them. They'll tell you that there's aliens around here too, and so they used us. They used our case and our family's connection to it to dismiss the claims of the person I was with.
Sure.
And so that's the kind of thing we've dealt with our whole life.
Your mom, of course, had her own experiences. And when you, before the major one, the September 1st, 1969 events, were you already talking with like kids in school about the earlier experiences?
My mother's 1954 incident, I think you're alluding to.
Yeah.
She didn't tell me that until long after 69.
Interesting.
However, there were some weird things that happened. So my mother was she was going up to, I think it was Maine, Gooseneck Lake, I think it was. And with her brother, Robert. And he was going to be going to college there. So my grandmother rented a cabin and they made it, a weekend of it. And my mother was out front with her brother's girlfriend, Kip. And so they were sitting out near the lake and they saw some things in the sky and didn't think too much of it. But later on that night, Kip and my mother both had an encounter, a personal encounter. And my grandmother was in the kitchen, as she says, and was making pancakes, I think. And they came into the kitchen, my mother first, and my grandmother recognized that something was wrong with Nancy, and she tried to explain that, her lower extremities were confined. She remembered something happening in the room. My grandmother was trying to condole, just put her arms around her,
Sure.
And didn't know what to make of it really until Kip came in and told my grandmother almost the exact same thing. So they packed up and they left. Then later on that day. So that was the first time my family had an experience. So you got to ask yourself, right? Is it us? Why were we involved in this? Was it our blood type? I'm O negative. Like 9 people in my family are Rh negative. You try to look for similarities or something to kind of piece this together because it seems so random. Yet I don't think it was. An awful lot of people in that area were witness to what have you, but there are an awful lot that just ride in our coattails too. Like there's a lot of people that didn't have anything to do with it, but now, I saw that, I was part of that. No, you weren't. Just like Travis knows who was in his truck, I know who was in our diner, right? So we know who was involved. But renaming it the Berkshires UFO didn't help either because Berkshires UFO incident makes it look like it happened in Great Barrington. It didn't happen in Great Barrington. It happened in Sheffield. That's why in the episode Berkshires UFO, you see the police officer open up the book. Oh, we don't see anything from that night. But then when they go to Sheffield, they go, oh, yeah, that's my father up there. We went looking for it. We went looking for the UFO because I had landed on the ground. I mean, Tom J went back. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. But Tom J went back into the radio station at the request of the local police department to go out on the air because they used to have a looping type of tape that would play music, right, on the AM station. And so that was the only entertainment or radio station that anyone could really tune into besides PLR, which came on later, but in the years. And so with that, they had said, Tom J, we don't know where this is happening, but we're hearing calls over the ham radio. Could you go back on the air real quick and just ask people to call the police department if they see where this is, or people are noticing, whether it be New Marlboro, Mass, Lenox, Great Barrington, whatever it was all over the place. And sure enough, he did. And there were calls that came in from Jug Inn Resort, and it was like a golf tournament. And they had seen it, heard it over his little radio or whatever, and they called the station. And that's how they came out and found out where it was. And of course, the Sheffield Police Department went out to look for it. Great Barrington was never involved.
Classic. Let's go back with a photograph.
Okay. By the way, can I say one more thing?
You may say several more things.
This is why I'm upset with Netflix, because they told me what they were going to do. There was going to be a reenactment of the diner. We were going to have a jukebox in there. We were going to show our house. I was going to sit on the on top of the barn that we had. They had gotten approval from the owners of our house. Now we were going to talk about what happened,
Sure.
and they went and just blindsided us with these people that were never part of our incident. I don't know if you've ever heard of anything similar to that, but yeah. So anyway, yeah, it was.
Major media can be very good at getting it very wrong. Obviously, they can also do a good job of things.
I
like to think that these kinds of incidents, what happened to you with Netflix for starters, is the exception to the rule. And we right now are in an age of things on television and available for downloading, of course, on UFOs. Most recently, I guess, the last one that made a major splash, as far as I'm concerned, was James Fox's latest, and did a wonderful job on the production. Anyway, this childhood photo that you sent, which I like so much, tell us about it a bit.
Well, that's me and the Roosevelt's grandchildren.
Okay.
Yeah, that's little Tommy Reed, I guess, in the middle there. As far as who they are, it's all written on the back of that, I believe. That was my grandmother's picture. Yeah. Yep, 16 months old. Yep.
Gosh.
And there's Christopher and was it their names, their ages, and that was written by my grandmother.
It's funny sometimes to look at handwriting of a beloved relative and everything flashes right back. I know that feeling. My grandmother had very distinctive handwriting, and you look at the movement of the letters and memories come back just there. When can you sort of set the scene leading up to September 1st, 1969?
Sure.
What was going on? I forgot to do you have any siblings, Tom?
I have a son, yeah, Christopher.
No, I mean a sister or brothers.
Oh, I have one brother, Matthew.
Right. And has Matthew, if I may ask, has he also been caught up in this over the years?
Oh yeah, he's spoken at conferences with me before. He did a show with Mike Barr and a few other people. What was it? Was Uncovering Aliens maybe, and that sort of thing. But my brother, he does really well, and he's a defense contractor actually.
Oh wow!
And he works in Peoria, Illinois. And so he's got to be careful. And some of the things that have happened in Netflix, again, for instance, and some of the interviews, they tend to be a little disrespectful. They're much better now than they were 15 years ago. Let's face it. Yeah. This is a new time, right? We're all
that ridicule factor is not as vicious now,
right? And so with that, he's had just one too many things happen. Where so a reporter asked him, could have what you've encountered, could it have been a gray alien? Could it have been, this, that, or the other thing, right? A reptilian, whatever. Mm-hmm. And Matthew's not really into the subject. I pretty much is the one who talked about it the most because after my accident, I was retired, right? So I had the time to do it. And so the news article comes out and they said to him, how far from the house was the craft? He goes, it could have been on our driveway. I mean, it was right there outside our window. So they said reptilians landed in Matthew's driveway. He never said that. Of course, his work gets news of that. It's online, and all of a sudden, I didn't say that. So he's like, Tom, that's it. I got your back, but I'm not going public. I got work. I have children. This is stupid. Sure. However, lately he's been a little more apt to get involved in things that I've, laid on his desk.
So I kind of waylaid myself there, but can you set the scene? What was going on with you, with your family? A little bit about the house that you lived in, the whole location, and then tell us what happened that life-changing night.
All right. Well, we first of all, my family and everything, they're from the city basically, and so when we moved to the Berkshires, my mother was bored out of her mind. Really, I think that's one of the reasons she bought the diner. But this is a very rural area. And when we were there, now it's like the Little Hamptons, right? It's really high end right now. But when we were there, it was just kind of, it was okay. But it was mostly my mother had a love for horses, and the racetrack was there, and it was a lot less expensive to move near that horse track than it was Saratoga, which isn't too far away either.
Sure.
However, it seemed like it was going to be a simple Norman Rockwell, right? Turned into like a Salvador Dali, right? But at the same time, it was a quiet, rural, very Norman Rockwell. Music in Tanglewood, Frog Hollow. But then again, it wasn't too far. She could still get back into New York. Was like an hour and a half away. You could be actually in New Rochelle or what have you in 20 minutes, right? Just past Stanford. And you could also be in Hartford in 45 minutes, and Albany was a half an hour away. So she still had access to places, but still had to go to Albany for furniture because they didn't have like rooms to go anywhere near where we lived. But it was a rural area, but it was an upper class type area too. It wasn't really rednecks. It was more country. And of course, with the space race and everything, you were getting this influx of people moving in, buying homes, buying land. And so it was changing rapidly, even at that time.
Yeah.
So a lot of things were happening. There were a lot of events happening. And that particular night, I was asked to ride in a 4-H horse show at Ski Butternut. And I did. This is the same night. And it was really hot that day. It was a blistering hot day. I remember that. And we were riding, and my saddle actually came loose because they had tightened the saddle around a horse that had, it was a little gassy, I guess at the time is how they explained it to me, holding air. And the saddle started coming loose, and I got a green ribbon or something, right? And I was like, So my mother says, well, let's call it a day. We'll go get some burgers. We'll go to the Meadows, which was another restaurant not far from ours, and we'll go get a shake and a hamburger and call it a night. I'm like, okay. So this was Labor Day weekend, right?
Right.
So we go to the Meadows, we eat, and we noticed there wasn't like a car on the road. We were like the only vehicle. I remember like my mom was looking around. I remember certain things like clips, right? Where I'm standing in this driveway or parking area, which was all stone, this reddish old building with a screen door, with a takeout window and that kind of thing. Huge burgers, that kind of thing. Picnic tables, all outside around the parking lot. And so we ate. No cars. It was weather. I don't know. It was a holiday weekend, but you would have thought there'd be more traffic. Even for a rural area, there wasn't a car on the road. And then we went to the diner afterwards to close ours up and let the chef go. My mother made the night deposit box drop next door and piled in the car. And a lot of kids used to leave their bikes there, like banana seat bikes back in the day, because they used to eat breakfast there and ride their bikes to school together. So we made sure we locked up the place and had to make sure the bikes were in. And so with that, then we were driving home, and it was getting late. So my mother decided to go across the old Sheffield covered bridge, which was kind of a shortcut. You've walked that bridge.
Yeah.
And so it looks a lot different now, but back in the day, it was like slats and holes between the boards. And as the car went over it, like clack, 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 it was really, you had to go 5 miles an hour, right? You weren't going to go through the bridge.
Yeah. Old New England covered bridge.
Right. So so we're going across it. I'm in the back seat behind my mom, and my grandmother remembers light coming through the slats or spaces in the boards,
right.
And it didn't make sense with our lights. That was the first thing that she remembered. She didn't say it at the time. She told me afterwards. But as we came down the bridge, there was like an incline before you hit the grass and the potholes and the dirt road. My grandmother turned around because I was giving my brother a candy. She says it was a red Fireball, and she thought he could choke. So she turns around from the passenger seat to tell me not to give that to him. And that's when she sees out the window, the back of the station wagon, that the sphere is rising up from the water. I never said it came out of the water. Okay. I said we saw it rising from the banks. I don't know where it came from. And it rose up maybe 2 or 3 stories. Everything seems bigger to me as a kid, right? So I go back a lot, and I still picture it. It was about 3 stories up. I'm sure about that. But the trees are also bigger, so it's kind of hard to get a fix on it. Yeah. But it was at least bigger than a Volkswagen Beetle, and it was white. And the best way to describe it, it looked like a cue ball, like a cue ball from a pool table. It wasn't like an orb. It didn't seem fuzzy. It was crisp, like a cue ball, putting off a very slight light to it. And as it rose up, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, it fired these rods into the water. So it looked like an ice cream cone. So on Ancient Aliens, when they did the show on it, it shows like this ice cream cone going down the road. but at least they got the idea how it looked for a moment. The lights didn't come from the bottom of it. Everybody remembers them coming from the sides, because if they came from the bottom, they wouldn't have made this big V shape, right? It came from the sides, and it both went down to about the same point into the water, and then it retracted or went away, whatever it was, and it started to go in the same direction as our car. So we're driving down the road, and you got this sphere going down the road with us, but there's a line of trees between us, so we didn't know where it went, While that was happening, my brother couldn't really see it. So he's looking around and he sees an orange type sphere, much smaller, much lower to the water, like maybe 10 feet from the water, opposed to 3 stories up. And it was right around that bend. You've been to the park, so as you go around that bend, right at the far corner of the bend where it widens a little bit and makes the turn, right there. So we saw that for a moment. That was interesting because it almost looked like a sun to me, with like the gases moving inside of it. I only saw it maybe, 10 seconds, but I remember what it looked like. Because when you're a kid, you bang, the UFO looked like a turtle shell, right? That looked like a sun. That looked like a cube. I mean, because I used to, just remember things. And so that looked alive to me. It had like this turning movement to it in the middle. And so we're now back going down the road, and my mother saw a clearing, which I think you might have known, but that was to the telephone pole that's on that dirt road down past our park. There was like a little area where you turn off, because that road wasn't meant for 2 cars. So every now and then it had like a spot to pull off. So if the car was in the opposite direction, you could get around each other. She stopped there near the telephone pole. And so we're looking out over the clearing, which at the time was very marshy. It wasn't where you could walk on it today. It was very wet and marshy, right? So it had almost like a river or a lake going through there, bled off from the river, right? It was okay. And so theoretically, it was over water also. Right. And so we stopped. We're looking for the sphere that we had seen earlier, the white one. And my mother says, "What's that?" And we're all looking, and you could kind of see this, like, it didn't look like anything fancy. It wasn't chrome and running lights and windows. No, it looked like a rock. I mean, it looked like a turtle shell. If you took the top of a turtle shell, sandwiched together, and had a big fat band around it, because it didn't come to like a point in the middle either. It was thicker in the middle with a small top and a small bottom, with a very thick band. It almost looked like a tire. My mom's reminded of her a tire.
What was the surface like, Tom?
It looked, it was kind of, it was like to me, it was dark, but it looked blackish and with a little bit of a pewter look to it, a little bit of gold coloring. But I don't want to say the front, because I don't know what the front was. But as we were going, the front of our car, which would have mirrored the front of said craft, the front of it had like a reddish or light to it. That what came out of the shell itself, like was self-emitting something. And so this reddish light kind of filtered through the craft. So that's what my mother saw. So when I say to people, it had lights, I'm not saying it had like floodlights. It lit up itself. Something emitted a light within the skin of it. And that's how you could see the shape and how big it was. It didn't go all the way to the back, but it was enough that you could see it. Yeah. And of course, your eyes adjust too. You're out at night. You start to. We weren't looking at this thing for 10 or 15 seconds. We were looking at this thing for minutes.
That's a long time.
Minutes. And we never saw that white sphere again. However, we started to feel like we were deep underwater. And why I say that, I've had years to think about this. Do you know when you dive into a deep end of a swimming pool? And I hit my ring earlier, but if someone taps a ring or something, it echoes through the pool. You know what I'm saying? So you hear a sound in a pool, you're deep in the water, and someone does that, it echoes, right? It's like that, where almost everything around us seemed muted. We didn't hear the crickets. We didn't hear katydids. We didn't hear the sounds of leaves blowing or anything. It was just like someone just took a switch and just flipped it off on life itself, right? It was like this vacuum of silence, right? It was a silent, that's a good term, right? Vacuum of silence. It's kind of what it was. And then you hear this tapping sound, and And then there was this like feeling like a numbness type of thing. Like we were just, what's going on? We don't know. And I look back and I say, were our neurons affected by something, communication with this thing? Or I have no idea why we felt that way. And then we heard all these stones like hitting underneath the fender wall of a car. You know, when you drive down an old dirt road, you ting, ting, ting,
Sure.
we heard something similar to that, which when I had an MRI, I thought that's what kind of connects me to that sound. And so then after that, there was this flash of light. I could see the dashboard. I could see the radio. I remember seeing the radio between the two of them right there in front of me. I remember seeing the steering wheel, my back of my grandmother's head. The light didn't bother my eyes. A lot of people say, "Oh, it was so bright, it didn't bother my eyes at all." It wasn't like a dome light or anything. I mean, this was bright, like it was broad daylight. My brother was sitting next to me at the same time, and we're just kind of like, you know, just normally we're talking, we're just nothing, and then
Sure.
boom, that was the last thing, you know, I remember from being in the car. And after that, I've never said, I'm not saying I wasn't, but I've never said that I was abducted by extraterrestrials on September 1st, 1969. I do believe we were in 67, which was very different than this night. Yeah. But we were taken out of our car by government, some form of government or an agency working within a branch of the government. There was government vehicles all over the area. We were working on the space race, you know, with millions of dollars going into beating Russia to space, not just for parts for the shuttle, but for weapons too, which is one of the reasons my father lost his life, for sharing information he probably shouldn't have. Yeah. And then, you know, when we were returned to the car, if you will, my grandmother and mother were reversed in the car. The ignition was off. That car was running. So, you know, ask yourself, how many extraterrestrials know how to turn the key off of a Chevy station wagon? You know, I mean, there's things where you go, that's human error. And with all the activity in the area regarding government and there's this rush to be the first to the moon, I think what happened, I think we were caught in between two very powerful moments, which found a way to connect us in the middle. I think that the craft was probably, you know, it was just something we saw, but government probably was tracking it, knew about it, and was in the area. They had seen government coming out of the woods with big phones on their hip. There were Jeeps. They found Jeeps way up in the woods. So this is not, there were actually little homes and cottages in the woods not far from Boardman Street where you were. And also, just to give you another idea, the magnesium for the atom bomb was mined 3 miles from our diner.
Oh, gosh.
Which went to Oak Ridge, where Stanton Friedman worked, which is where I live now. You know, Oak Ridge is 12 miles up the road. So you had the magnesium being mined for the atom bomb 3 miles down the road. You had NASA getting all this money for the space race. You had Sprague Electric in our backyard, General Electric, Command Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, right? You know, you live in that area, all working at the same time to beat Russia to space. And where did they go on the weekends? They went to the track to have some fun, and our diner was basically down the road from the track. And so they ate in our diner. So a lot of the times my mother would keep the place open late at night because she needed the money, right? And they wanted to have a private place to talk,
sure,
right? They can't talk at the local supermarket or the laundromat. That's where they went. So where do they go? Nancy, can we have the place tonight? We'll order some food. She would take these big baskets of French fries and deep fry them in bacon fat because that's what they liked. Kill them with salt. Put a bunch of money in a jukebox, and they would stay, order food. My mother would make some money. She'd overhear the conversation. She made friends with them, and that's how our diner later on became instrumental in all this and was proven to alter the natural progression of the community. So our event was historically true.
Thom, where your memory cuts off of what was going on in the car with your mom, your grandmother, and your brother, what is your next memory?
I remember being in a large hangar. I've always said it reminded me of an airplane hangar.
Yeah.
My mother and father were, you know, small plane pilots, so I used to go to Great Barrington. You know, I never went up in a plane, but that's where they were taking their tests and everything. And so that reminds me of where I was. So there was a large open area. And I remember what looked like fluorescent tubes today. I didn't know what it was then, but where the ceiling met the wall, there were lights. It was like a long tube, a space, a long tube, a space, a long, and that was the only light that was in there. But it was enough to light the place up that I could see I was alone in this big open industrial looking area. It wasn't high tech. It didn't remind me of anything fancy, anything modern, I should say. And I was sitting on something. I don't know what it was. I don't remember looking back at it. And I came to my feet. And when I did, I looked up and there was a door that opened and there was a figure there and there was a hallway, just another room or hallway, you know. And I was grabbed really hard on my left arm. I still remember that because it hurt. I mean, it was like, it hurt. And I wasn't, walked like friendly. I was like, my arm was there. Like, if this is my arm, this is actually pretty good Canada Dry, by the way. And I was like pushed in front of the person. So I couldn't really see. I don't remember who it was at all. And when I went out the door, though, I was handed off to another person and then taken down this long, narrow hallway. And at the end, it teed off. And I took a left and a right, and I was in this other room that reminded me, if you've ever had an MRI, what that center would look like with the glass block. And there was an opening to the right of this glass block and to the left of the glass block. And I was sitting on what reminded me now, I'm not saying everything's perfect in my memory, but it's enough. I know. But there was like what looked like an autopsy table. And it had one post in the middle, with like something on top of it like this, which I was sitting on. And I saw what reminded me of a large ant-like figure, which is in the Roswell Museum. I've spent a lot of time and money to get a depiction of what my brother and I and my parents collectively remember, or my mother, I should say. And it had a head like a football, with round eyes on it. I remember this is long before the gray alien thing ever made the news with Whitney Strieber in Community.
Yes, and the beings, the term gray was still several decades, or at least a decade away from coming in.
Exactly. And this reminded me, but nonetheless, it had the big round eyes and the shape of a football. And we've been drawing this since I was 9 years old. One of my sketches is in the museum. It was so faded that it was turned into a reversal. So the black was white, the white was black, because it has been so, dirty, or it was now almost goldish looking. And so anyway, yes, if you look at it, it's got a big head with eyes, on the side of it. And that, at the time, I think because I was young, I was scared. So maybe I looked at it as a more frightening than maybe it was.
Sure.
I'm open. Yeah. My brother too. But it was off when I was sitting on a table. It was to the left of me near this door that exited out again. So there was like a long hallway with a bunch of rooms along the hallway. And when I went out this particular door, because I got scared and I actually ran. The other thing too is I was going from being very calm and comfortable, I guess, or cooperative, and all of a sudden I wanted to run. I remember this because I asked myself, why was I just sitting there and saying anything? Because I remember just sitting there and just looking at this glass block wall and seeing these figures. There were two of them. They were facing a wall as if they were doing something or looking at something inside this wall. And I just all of a sudden ran. I ran out the right side. When I got out, this is how big this place was. When I got out that door, the area that I ran into, it was a massive circle. It wasn't a square room. It was a circle. And if you've ever walked into the front of a Walmart and just looked at the size of the building, it was at least that big. So it was a lot bigger. It was a lot bigger than the craft we saw.
Wow.
So it was not a craft.
Yeah.
Right? And the ignition was turned off. My mother and grandmother reversed. There's more going on here. There's no simple explanation, right? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. And so with that, I remember like not knowing where to go. And there were markings. I remember some types of markings that looked like gray markings or whatever in the floor itself. And I was grabbed again and brought back in. I was put on this, what I said looked like resembled an autopsy table. It wasn't, but it resembled it. And this apparatus came out of the top. So I was on this bottom thing. This apparatus came over me like this. And then a second piece came over that. And there were holes in the side. And once the holes lined up, these packets that reminded me of large raisins were placed on my body. And I remember like a bump or something to my head. There was movement around my head. I come to in the same room that I originally found myself in, that room with the fluorescent looking lights. And then I come to in the car, and my grandmother is now right down maybe 10 or 15 feet from our diner at a restaurant or store, I should say, called Silks. And again, it was like this little local shop that sold, buggies for babies and candy bars and, milk, like a little convenience place. Well, kind of a cool store. I miss those places. And so anyway, I come to, and I'm looking at the front of the car, and over the steering wheel, I see my grandmother walking almost directly in front of the car. And my mom was not conscious. My brother was incoherent. His head was on my leg, actually. And so I'm calling. No one's responding to me. No one's answering me. Everybody's kind of out, which is another thing that reminds me of like some type of a sedative, because we didn't come out of this at the same time. Yes. We all came out of it within 5-10 minutes of each other. And my brother was the last to come out of it, and he was the youngest and the smallest, so it would have affected him more. Yeah. But to get back to what happened, I looked over the dashboard. I saw my grandmother walking into the store. And so I grabbed the door, and I'm going, Nana, Nana. And she was kind of out of it too, but she was kind of walking aimlessly, kind of walking into the place. And as she gets in the door, had a bell on it. The bell goes off. I follow her in, and I'm yanking on her arm and stuff, and she's not responding to me. That store's still there, by the way. I still remember this. And so she walks past the clerk at the counter and goes right to the back where there are strollers and baby buggies and that kind of thing. And she starts pushing a baby buggy like there's a baby in it. And she's behind these bikes and buggies, and I'm grabbing her arm going, Hannah, but I don't know why I was doing that, because there was a lot of stuff in between us. She couldn't come, but I'm pulling her anyway. It's like how confused we were. And so the store clerk comes over and kind of walks us out. Is everything okay? Whatever conversation that was. And my grandmother never told them why. She went there for help, but she didn't know what to ask for, what kind of help she needed. Jeez. And so it sounded so ridiculous as she was coming to, and I was okay. And she looked out the door. My mother was now standing out front, so she never said anything. But if she had, this all would have been different, turned out differently, because Tom J had already gone on the radio and asked people to let them know where this craft was being seen so they could dispatch the local police department. Eddie Galata's father was a chief of police to the location. No. So she never said anything. However, the next morning when we opened up the diner, on the radio, we had this little white AM radio, right, over the grill, started talking about the event and how they had people that were witnesses to this, and started playing the recorded calls. And people in the restaurant were now going, oh, I know him, I know her, I know Melanie, blah, blah, blah. And so at that point in 69, this kind of put a bow around everything and kind of helped our family more than it hurt it, because between 67 and 69 was when everyone thought we were crazy, because we had reported it earlier. And my mother didn't realize at the time that there was all this going on with the space race and everything. So she's like, sure, you can talk about whatever you want in here. We're not worried about this or that or the other thing. While other kids and parents and relatives were worried that something was going to get back to where they worked and they could lose their job over it. Sure. So, we shook things up. And but in 69, that helped us, because so many other people saw it. There was like 250 witnesses, and the radio station got involved. I think you've got an actual news clipping from 1967, which was the first incident we were involved with. Right. You can see right there, Zuko in the third line in. Peter Zuko was one of my best friends. Mm-hmm. And I still know the Zuko family to this day. Huh. And you'll see on the bottom, West Sheffield Road, near North Egremont, which is where the Egremont Country Club was, which is where the HINET classification was issued. Mm. And that's from 67. So it wasn't a one and done. Yeah, that's the actual news article. I got that from, I got rights to that, by the way. I can use that however I want. So they gave me, the rights to it. So in 67, to 69, we were like the laughing stock, right? But 69, because it was a holiday, so people were out with their families. They were out with people they didn't know. So if they saw something, they couldn't.
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought because you and I have just burned through our first hour.
I'm sorry.
This is Peter Robbins. My guest tonight is Thom Reed, and we will be back in 5. Don't go away.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from Unx Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to Research a Haunted House can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unxmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unxmedia.com or amazon.com.
Tickets are now on sale for Rebels of Disclosure 2025, May 12th through the 15th in Grafton, Illinois at the beautiful Pierre Marquette Lodge and Conference Center. This will be a 4-day event with 12 speakers covering topics such as ET contact, experiencer testimonies, lost history, secret space programs, time travel, Illuminati, parallel realities, and so much more. Visit journeytotruth.online for more details.
And we're back. Meanwhile, here on Earth is the show. I'm your host, Peter Robbins, and my guest tonight is Thom Reed. And we stopped at a rather loaded moment in time.
Yeah.
You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about particularly all the cases I was privy to in the years that I worked as Bud Hopkins' assistant. And rarely are experiences described in the same way, but often there are common aspects, often small things. The lighting in the very large space, the table, which plays a part in so many of these events, the non-standard reality of, for some people, it's like describing it as running through molasses. for you, it's like, wait a minute, what happened to all of the sounds of nature that should be going on right now? I'm in another place, or that what you're actually feeling makes no sense given the reality of the moment that you're in. You don't know where you are. And three closest people in your life, your brother, your mother, your grandmother, are with you. In a normal lucid state, this would be cause for total panic, even terror. And there's something so counter to the logic. Many people have come to the conclusion, I'm one of them, that certainly some of these other intelligences can obviously affect our perceptions and our feelings.
Yeah.
At the same time, we also have to give credit to the physiology of human shock. When I'm hearing you describe some of this, I'm thinking to myself, if that had been me, I would be freaking the F out.
Yeah.
I would be absolutely distraught beyond words, and remembering part of my own childhood sighting of that in the post moments of everything being, well, just fine and kind of interesting, and gee, what a beautiful day it is, which normally would have made sense in that moment did not make sense. At what point did what I'll laughingly call reality kind of return to the situation? How did you?
That's a really good lead-in, if you will, because what I don't talk about often is that we did have, my mother did have an experience when she was young.
Yes, and I'd like to come back to that, the 1954 experience, if you don't
So
mind.
this wasn't a first time for us. And I think that, of course, 66 and 67, which made the newspapers and everything else, as did 69. I mean, two of our events made the news,
Yeah.
which is, remarkable in itself. But I think my mother, at the time when we were going across the bridge and my grandmother saw what she did, I think that was something my mother was chasing that. We weren't, first of all, I wouldn't be scared of a UFO anyway. It's not like they're shooting at me or anything, but I mean, so it's different. It's not, I'd be more, there's a lot of more things I'd be more concerned about if I saw a UFO, right? I mean, somebody with a McDonald's bag and a handgun. I mean, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's not attacking you. It's not, but at the same time, it's powerful in its own way and it's out of the norm. Yeah. And because of that, just like watching a horror movie, just because a branch hits your window while you're in the middle of Friday the 13th, it startles you, but it's not meant to startle you. And that's the way I look at things. I mean, it's all in how you perceive it. But so in the way, the perception of my parents,
yes,
for us being, vulnerable and not having any idea what this could be or the fear or what this could possibly mean to us.
Yes.
My parents were chasing it, or my mother was chasing it. She wanted to see it.
Wow.
And that's why she pulled over and was looking for it. So I don't think that she felt there was going to be any harm or that we were going to be removed from the vehicle. And this would become what it was. I think like anybody else, you're driving down the road, you see something out of this world, you're like, pull over. What is that? We didn't have, cell phones at the time, but if we did, we would have been filming it. So for that, I think that that kind of explains the behavior of my parents. For us, we didn't know what we were walking into or what have you. We certainly had front row seats for it, but so I think in that respect, I kind of see why they responded in the way that they did. But afterwards, we were in shock. Because you go to see something, Peter, and you're there and you go, oh my God, look at it. It's remarkable, right? You're all like, oh my God, right? And then all of a sudden, you're kind of finding yourself back in town and everything's different. And you were affected by something. Now you're scared about what might have happened to you. Not so much what you saw, but what happened. What was those packets? What just happened to us? And you didn't have anyone you could talk to about it.
Did the four of you talk to each other?
Yeah, all the time. And a lot of other people. I mean, we were on a school bus and conversations with me on a school bus. There was a lot of children. There was a lot of other children that were involved in this. A lot, but not some of the people you hear about. But yeah. Our school bus driver used to talk to us. One of my teachers did. So, but you're right. I mean, there's a time when you just try to sit back for a minute over the dinner table. We were in the kitchen, right, at the farmhouse, and my mother had my brother and I sitting there. And she was giving us cereal, and this was the night we came back. And rather than put us in our room, she put me on one sofa and my brother on the other, and we're giving us a baby aspirin and orange juice.
Wow.
So I remember that.
Remind us how old you were at 1969 when the major event happened there.
I was almost 10. My brother was 2.5 years younger than me. So, you know, it was like eight. It happened in September. My birthday's in February, so 9.5.
That's a lot to deal with for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, there were just so many things. To give you another example of something something I'm thinking about right now.
Tom, what's the significance of this?
Well, that's the Egremont Country Club. If you look at the newspaper, Egremont was where the sightings came from that were called in to get the Hynek classification. So that's the 1969 South Egremont Hynek classification that it got.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Christopher Dodd, for a lot of people, the name might not ring a bell, but certainly a very influential senator from the state of Massachusetts, and somebody who early on, among our elected officials, chose to get involved and rather deeply involved in the subject of the UFO cover-up. This letter is dated from '83. Can you tell us the significance of it? And of course, it's to your dad.
Yeah, my father was basically running for mayor and judge of probate, and my mother was with the Historical Society, and they were Democrats in the day, and so Governor O'Neill and of course again, Christopher J. Dodd was backing my father in his run. They went to mixers together and that kind of, and so my father was running, he backed him.
And a flashback here.
Yeah, that's Bonnie, and she became the chef for Melanie Griffin and Antonio Banderas. But that's she used to play the Roxy, but that's the Agora Ballroom. I booked them as a warm-up band. I don't know who they were warming up. Maybe the Fabulous Thunderbirds or something. Was it Society Children? Yeah. Oh, they were headlining. They did a song called Metal for Meals. They did pretty well. John Lamson in the background. He was my roommate.
Oh, for goodness sakes. Okay.
As a stage manager. Yeah.
The 80s.
I know, right? Water beds.
Let's talk about this document.
Sure. So, Bletchman again, that's a letter. He was writing Muhammad Rabin, who was the president of the Parapsychology Society at the United Nations back in '92, just prior to the hearing. And off to the right, although it's blurry, I'm sorry about that. These are some of the conversations and some of the highlighted topics that were discussed. And if you look, there was an awful lot of '70s documentation and or subjects to be discussed.
Yes.
And from the Department of Defense to the Pentagon to the Greece Ministry of Defense, how crafts were paralyzing missiles to be fired upon them. And that actually is from the United Nations. That paper on the right came back from my father.
Yes.
It did come back with my father. Robert Bletchman had it and gave my father a copy, I should say.
And I should say here that really by chance, Robert Bletchman, a good guy and a very thoughtful, outstanding attorney, no longer with us, but he was a friendly colleague of mine who back in the day was a regular at most of the conferences that we had here in the Northeast, where there are fewer UFO conferences than out west and southwest, etc. But a very stable, rock-solid presence in the world of UFO research at the time, who connected up with your dad.
Yeah, the connection with Bletchman too. Bletchman was a friend of my father's because they were both Democrats and ran in the same circles and that kind of thing. And with that, I don't think they were really close friends, but they respected each other and kind of just knew each other. Because to be honest with you, my father and I, our family didn't know anything about UFOs until this really happened.
Yeah.
And so I think meeting him gave my father someone to talk to.
Okay. Yeah. Regarding your dad, I just want to get this in right here. That is your dad's certificate of graduation with his degree in law.
Juris Doctorate, right? He was a doctor. Juris Doctorate of Law. Yeah.
God. Can you tell us a bit about your dad as a person and as a dad?
Yeah, my father, he was a very grounded, down to earth, just a nice guy. When he saw my mother getting picked on that day when they met, he basically stepped in. He was from New York and he's talking to locals, so he was maybe a little crass, maybe, he had a beautiful, I think he had a 38-foot Hunter sloop in Florida, in Vero Beach, and loved the water and the sun, and was getting ready to retire. I mean, he was a principal for a while, actually, before he got into becoming an attorney.
Yes.
And afterwards, he got out of law and went back to administration. And I think he really, like a few people I know, they're more interested in helping those get along and providing for your town. I mean, he had a gazebo put in the town and a new bridge and all this. He wanted to beautify the area, and a lot of people wanted like satellite dishes right near the road. So he basically was a really good guy when it came to making the town look nice. And so
got a great face.
Yes, and he was like that with people too. And if you look at the date that he died, October 2nd, which is the anniversary of our case being mentioned. Here's something else about our case too. Our case was not a front runner at the UN. My father, only because he was running, said, well, you can mention it, but I still have aspirations, right? So, be cool, Robert. And there was a respect there. But by hiring him and giving me that check for $500, and I went to Manchester and to Broad Street and dropped it off his office. He had a big picture behind the chair that I was sitting on, was facing his desk, that showed an image of a craft under the Hudson River. He was big into Hudson River sightings, and he showed me some pictures I've still to this day never seen again. That one was taken by a police officer off the bridge, and you can clearly see the UFO under the Hudson River. So the idea here was that our case, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead again. I know I ramble terribly. It's like my show, right? I got a podcast myself. So anyway, because our incident took place over the Housatonic River, there was this thought, well, could have what happened in the Hudson, could something have carried over? Because you've got, oh my God, you've got the Hudson River, you got the Berkshires UFO, if you will, and then you've got, there was a triangle in the Boston area. What is that called? I can't remember the name of it. Matt Moniz talks about it a lot.
Right. I know what you mean.
And it's like, and then you got Betty and Barney Hill. So you got Betty and Barney Hill, then you got the Boston sightings, and you got the Berkshires UFO. It's almost like it was going in one direction towards New York. And so, to Bob's credit, he was like, well, it looks like there's something similar here. Would you mind if we just mentioned it in support of the Hudson River sightings? And also Cash and Landerman, because of the way we describe the activity around the car and that lack thereof of the of the environment. He thought that might be of interest to, mention on behalf of the Cash and Landerman incident. So the front runners was really Cash and Landerman, then Hudson, which he had an interest in, and our case being somewhat of a support mechanism because of the pillar standing my father had.
Yes. This next document, this relates to polygraph. And as we see at the top, no deception indicated, whose polygraph was this?
Mine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look under signal quality, you'll see Jim Morris. Well, Jim Morris is Tim Burchett's neighbor. They share a property line. So Tim Burchett's neighbor administered my polygraph on behalf of a detective at the it was advanced polygraph, but he was part of a bigger Department of Defense Polygraph Institute.
Was this done at your request, Tom?
Yep. Well,
Good.
I had to because of the when our case was going to be or being looked at as a possible archivable case for the state of Massachusetts or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I had to take a polygraph test. And I think they were surprised I passed it, to be quite honest with you. And so Roswell got involved in that. The Roswell Research Library also opened their doors to Debbie. Debbie Kessler. Her husband was an attorney. She was a paralegal for the office, and she actually went down to the Roswell Research Library and mined for information, and then sent it back to the Historical Society. Yeah.
And this is chronological, but I wanted to drop it right where it goes. You did have a business life going on, threading through all of these experiences, after you were an adult.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I did, because that was how I was able to get some press around this. As you know, you've seen the articles from the 60s. They're there, letters from the radio station. I mean, but it never really got attention. If I hadn't had these contacts in film and television from Miami Models, who knows if it would ever have gotten to where it is.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Yep, Dun and Bradstreet. Yeah. Yeah, we were doing pretty well. Yeah, you probably remember Ocean Drive. So I used to work with the Panjira Club at the Hard Rock Casino, and I used to provide them runway fashion models for the Ocean Drive one-way shows. They came through my agency too.
Okay. Now, back to the UFO subject.
Yeah, there's a proclamation in Connecticut. There's a bench there in honor of my father. There's actually a Remembrance Day.
That's pretty special.
Mm-hmm.
It's very special, actually. Okay.
There you go. That's an important one right there, because that's Friday the 2nd of October, 33-4-26, and Robert Bletchman. And I still have an old phone book where I have Robert Bletchman's phone number in it. Yeah.
And this, of course, is an official UN release here.
Yeah, the Parapsychology Society.
Yeah. Can you talk about the circumstances surrounding your father's death?
Yeah, so he at the time he was working in Connecticut, and he had gone back into administration. He was a college professor too for a while, and I don't think he liked law. To be honest with you, I think he got tired of representing people who were guilty. Like I said, he was a good guy, and it affected him after a while. Real quick, so this guy stole a cow, got away from a farm up in New England. The guy shot it, skinned it like a deer, fed his family because it was broke, offered to pay for the cow, work it off or whatever, and the guy wanted to prosecute him for it. My dad had to represent the guy prosecuting him, and he said, let him pay for it. Just the guy's broke. He didn't know it was yours. And I think that was when he finally walked from Manassas, Slaby, and Leard. But anyway, like I said, that to your question earlier, that's the kind of person he was. He was a good guy. But as far as his death goes, he had gone to, he had told my mother and me that when the time was right, he was going to write a book and do the right thing and do something with this. And so he hung out at a little Irish pub. He'd go there after work, have his little drink, talk to his friends a little bit before going back to, we lived in Westport at the time, and he had right on the beach. It was on the Long Island Sound, and
nice.
Savin Rock, Connecticut. I don't know if you know where that is. And so he stopped outside of Bridgeport, had a couple drinks with his friends, talked about the book, and volunteered what he was doing and what he was going to talk about. And about 3 months later, I'm guessing 3-4 months, whatever, on the anniversary of our case being mentioned by Robert Bletchman, who you knew, who represented us, and I handed Robert a check for $500. He went to work that morning. His head hit the desk. Administrative assistant came in, saw my father's head on the desk, called 911. They took him to Yale New Haven Hospital, and he was burning up. And so they gave him antibiotics, of course. You know, he was a public figure, the whole bit. They gave him shots in the thighs. I guess the Augmentin and Levaquin in the thighs to break this temperature that was skyrocketing. And so with that said, it went higher. It continued to skyrocket. And so they gave him more shots. And the more antibiotics they gave him, the higher his temperature went, because they were killing the white bacteria that could fight the bad bacteria. And what he had in his body following his death on that same day was that he had a rare fungus in his body. They don't know where it came from. So the New York Times ran an article saying, oh, maybe he had Legionnaire's disease. He didn't have Legionnaire's. They did an autopsy and found that it was a fungus. It was a deadly fungus that was in his blood. So the CDC came in from Atlanta and looked at his office, and they found glass in the outside air conditioning unit. It was an older building, so it had a big, large industrial air conditioning. And so the CDC came in. The mayor of Bridgeport shut down the building completely. And it has not been open to this day.
Oh my gosh!
It's still closed down.
How was your father?
I got a picture of the environmental truck that was there.
How was your father's health up until this moment?
Fine.
Has anybody?
He was in his 50s, Peter. He was 54. He was 54. Had a nice cushy job, making about $180,000 a year. Loved his little Saab convertible. Took care of my mom. Had a beautiful little beach house. He was just going to write a book and think about retiring. It's not like everybody else. We have, health concerns here and there. But I mean, no, he was not in any condition where you would have thought this would have happened.
Yeah, and I'll just say right here, for some folks, this might seem like, oh, well, it's all conspiratorial driven. And of course, the government murdered him to shut him up. And, oh, you guys, people die and things happen. And you try to make, for me, and I think for you, we approach this in as logical and grounded a manner as possible. Deductive reasoning, common sense, and eliminating all possibilities that remotely could have applied, and you're still left with a really dark mystery here.
I can't prove that he was murdered, obviously, but Occam's razor, right? I mean, he was a politician. He knew a lot about the space race. He divulged an awful lot. The case was mentioned at the UN. He was going to expose a bunch of things. He had an ear. People listened to him. He was popular. He was powerful. And he was getting ready to write a book. And you've got 365 days a year that you could drop dead for no friggin' reason by some rare fungus in your blood, right? And it happens on the same day that your case went to the United Nations. Please, come on.
This is something I've never heard of. It reminds me of that famous case where a Soviet asset who had gone over to England and was killed by a neurotoxin introduced when the agent involved, the killer, basically used an umbrella that had was rigged up to
at the airport. At the airport?
That's right.
I remember that. My father talked to me about. I mean, that was something that not my father. One of the guys from the behavior panel was with me, and we met with. Tim Burchett. We went to lunch.
Yes, and let's remind people who Tim is.
Possibilities of what my father could have exposed, because they were making this. God, I'm glad you mentioned that. This air gun that would shoot a vaccine type thing from a distance.
Yeah. And it'd feel like a little pinprick, which it was, and then bang, down you'd go. Again, not drawing a parallel between these two things, but it just stands out as much as this rather famous espionage murder some years back. Can I ask you how you dealt with it at the time? I mean, your dad's fine, and all of a sudden he's dead. and the
Yeah.
reasons can't have made sense to you or your brother or your mom.
Well, my family had a house in Florida, so I used to see them quite often for months at a time. But this was when, I was actually living in West Palm Beach or Boynton Beach, and they were here. It was Connecticut. So it took me a week or so to get up, and I did go to their funeral, of course. And I was so broken up. They wanted me to talk, and I just I couldn't. This is going to sound a little crazy, but I was actually became closer to my father than I was my mother because I think he saw something in me too, and I think that I think he was trying to bond with me, the whole bit is from a young age, and but he wasn't actually there to see what we experienced, although he knew us, and he really took an interest in the topic more and more and more as time went on. Certainly around the 80s and 90s, so we really bonded because I think my mother was still trying to make sense of it. My mother became very religious because of it, as did my brother. My father and I were more like buds, and we could talk about things. And when he was going to do this book, we were working together. I was laying in bed at night writing things down. I was starting to write a book too. I still have a lot of pages from the 80s when we were still talking. And so I was working more closely with him on the possibility of him doing the book.
Oh,
And so when he passed, I was absolutely devastated. My brother, though, was the one who said, we need to do something about it. My brother's the one who said he was killed. And my brother he had gone and spoke to the media. My brother spoke to the press. And actually, the mayor of Bridgeport offered my brother and I a job with the town, too. Just don't sue the city for anything because it was a city building. So they gave my mother, I think, $25,000 not to file suit. And they offered my brother and I a job with the city of Bridgeport. And my brother was just, he called it like it was, man. My brother, I wear who I am on my sleeve, too. I got a shorter temperature than my brother. I can be a pain in the ass sometimes. But my brother, he was an ex-Marine, and he's just, his arms are the size of my legs, and he just walked in there with confidence, and he goes, we're going to find out what happened and all this kind of thing. He was really demanding. And I was like, yeah, let's do something with it. And my brother's the one, well, you got contacts and television and this kind of thing. See if you can get somebody to do something with this, and I'll work on it from this side. So originally this whole thing about our case was about showing my father didn't die for nothing.
yeah.
And it just kind of went from there, but it was really spearheaded by my brother, Matthew.
Good for Matthew. Let's talk a bit about the death certificate here.
Yeah, and there I think it says septus.
Yeah.
2006 septus, yeah.
Except
cardiac shock, which causes heart to stop, but he had a fungus in his blood.
And that's not mentioned anywhere here.
No, it's not, but
Boy.
1:41 in the morning. Well, there you go. Yeah.
Again, for some people, they dismiss polygraph as a problematic art, so to say, or procedure. For me, if it's well administered and your controls are in check, and you don't have somebody whose full attention is on beating it, which is not out of the question. It certainly can be done and has been done. But it's, for me, it's a sign of good faith if somebody says, yes, I want to go through this process to just add gravitas and one more brick in the wall of the reality and the substance of my claims. Let's talk about this letter to you, Mr. Reed.
A lot of these letters were for the Historical Society of Massachusetts, confirming my father was, in office, and the polygraph test, and of course, like I said, they didn't expect me to pass it. I don't blame them, But it was ironic that the guy who administered it was a police detective who was also Tim Burchett's neighbor. So that was kind of cool.
And again, for our viewers and listeners who are not familiar with Tim Burchett's name, who has come up several times now, he is a representative of the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, he lives right down the road from me.
Okay, who is very active and has been for some years now in the House Investigations Committee on UFOs and UAPs. So I've had one major exchange with him, and a very interesting guy, very committed to trying to get to the bottom of all this.
Yeah, he's another one who's very down to earth and just wants the truth to be told. And
exactly.
Of course, even he's fighting City Hall to some degree, but he's making more headway than anyone else, and I'm really proud of him for that. I mean, I didn't know he didn't drink when I first went out with him, so I'm like, hey, can I get you a drink? He's like, I don't drink. I'm like, okay, coffee. So I think we had quesadillas or something. Actually, I introduced Travis to him once. He came up and I took him out with Travis too. Yeah.
He, for me, is also emblematic of, he's a Republican, he's a conservative, but it's a side issue as far as this goes. And it's a point some people feel I may be leaning into too hard, but the fact is that the truth about UFOs, UAPs, and their implications for humanity, the ones that are in that category of other intelligences and advanced technology, are one of the few subjects that can bring people of decidedly different political beliefs together. And when I heard Tim speak at length, there was really no politicizing in any way. The more people we have from both sides of the aisle that take this subject seriously and establish their own working relationships, friendships, and partnerships in this, the better we are as a country moving forward, trying to,
I agree. And
a faction of us trying to get.
Yeah, and in some respects, he was a lot like my father, where just because he was in office or had some power, he still was just like you or me. You could talk to him like we're going out to watch a football game or something. He's very, nonchalant about it. He doesn't, and the thing about Tim too, if you're not aware, he's very religious. He's very religious, and yet he still will hold a 20-minute conversation with you about Bigfoot. He doesn't care who thinks it's funny or odd or whatever, and he lives in the Bible Belt. So I got to hand it to him.
I've met many people of faith who superimpose their faith and their religious beliefs on these mysteries. Others, like Tim, who hold them completely or in greatest part separate. And I admire that. It shows a certain discipline and a desire to approach things as clearly as possible and not necessarily influenced by your personal beliefs, whatever they may be.
When it comes to a conversation about religion and ufology, I don't think our Lord and Savior focused everything on one planet, right? That would be a waste of space, don't you think? Yeah, so, anyway. This is the crop circles that show up in Sheffield. A lot of people aren't aware of that either, but that's the thing about the area. Whether that's a crop circle, I don't know, but it was written up as one. I have no idea what that is. It's not my forte, but there's crop circles, if you will, in 95. There were, again, these markings in fields in 2012, 2013. There's just a lot of activity there. And for that, I don't know what to make of it. I could give my opinion, but it would just be speculation. But there's something going on there. I think that there's an underground base. You had Nike missile sites. You have the NORAD towers in Dalton. You've got Minuteman missiles. You got some of the highest elevation in Dalton. That area is outside Manhattan. It's not far from Hartford. It's not far from Albany. Rural. You got some high mountains. You've got no-fly zones, and you've got all these manufacturing facilities working for our U.S. government. Something's going on there.
It makes sense. It's not, some wild claim. It's really deductive reasoning and quite logical. And from MUFON?
Yeah, Jan Harzing.
Acknowledging the Reed family case.
That was, yeah, about the. I think that wasn't regarding an article they wrote about our case going to the UN.
Ah, okay.
If you look, where is it? The original case, yeah, attracted the attention of Robert Blechman.
Right. Okay.
At the United Nations. Yep, 33-426. And that's
And
another thing. Robert Blechman actually investigated our case. That's what that letter says, actually.
yes.
Yeah.
And he was a really good investigator. Again,
It was good.
as an attorney, he applied his investigative skills very well and very pragmatically. He didn't over dramatize things, that's for sure.
And he worked well with Adrian, his wife. Did you know
Yeah.
Adrian?
I met several times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yet one more confirmation here as far as your case goes, and you're being impossible to take down as far as polygraph goes. That's for sure.
It is what it is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, yeah. This is the letter that really changed everything. So this was, so after with my father's, if I may, I just tell me to shut up if I'm rambling senselessly, but
No.
when I got contacted back in 2010 or 12 originally, and they asked me to take the polygraph test and send them some information, which I did. And a matter of fact, there's another girl who worked with me who I can't think of her name offhand, but she was in Maine with us. She was a friend of Audrey's. She was going to write my book at one time. She was going to work with me on the book. I was there with Linda Cortiel. We were at a hotel there. She was also working with me to send information to the state of Massachusetts and a local historical society. And I think they were just overwhelmed, kind of like even tonight, I've got a lot of documentation that they didn't expect to have. And so the more information I gave them, the more they read into who Blechman was, more they read into WSBS Radio, who broadcasted the news articles from the Berkshire Eagle, 2 news articles or even more maybe. And then, of course, the witnesses and everything else, they were just like, wow, this happened. And so they were first going to do or put together a marker in memory of my late father for advocating something that this area and so many of them were also ridiculed for.
Yes.
And that was a way of paying tribute to my dad. But then they saw, wow, this is bigger than just what we originally thought.
Yeah.
And so once they collected the evidence that they needed to put this before a board meeting or a census, they also hired or worked with, I don't know who paid who, the attorney to go to Roswell and mine for information at the research library. And she found some documents too. And collectively, this all went to a vote. And they voted that they knew that they couldn't use the word like UFO case for the most part without following it with something like in here, I think it says off-world incident. So they were really hesitant to induct this in the light that it should have been, maybe, because they didn't think they could get the governor to rubber stamp it. And so once they wrote this up and it went and passed, I mean, I was like, my Lord, are you kidding me? And so they did at that point need the governor to put their seal of approval on it, so they weren't out there by themselves. Yeah. And that's how the governor's letter followed.
I'm trying to imagine if you're a regional historical society, and they're all over the world, you deal with a certain quality and type of information overall. And for a traditional historical society, Great Barrington or wherever, to be presented with a preponderance of very real evidence about something wholly other that is not even above their pay grade, but is just not what historical societies, are chartered to do, except that this case comes crashing in on them on a certain level. And being fair brokers, honest examiners, and chroniclers of the real history of the area, it must have been quite a series of meetings and exchanges to get to the point where these folks, I'm guessing, who probably were not, involved in the subject of UFOs, maybe a little personal curiosity on part of members, but very likely is as well not, to get to this point. And of course, it all culminates in this extraordinary document. On behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I am pleased to confer on you this governor's citation in recognition of the off-world incident on September 1st, 1969, which engaged the Reed family, which has been established. Your dedicated service to the incident was factually upheld, founded, and deemed historically significant and true by means of Massachusetts historians. The records highlighting this historic event are now officially part of the Great Barrington, Massachusetts Historical Society's collection and your recent induction into Massachusetts history. Signed by Charles D. Baker, the governor. That must have been a hell of a day for you.
Yeah, that's the second one I received too. Some of the, by the way, in the middle there, you'll see that it was signed by Judge Titus.
Oh.
It was also signed by a court, a judge of the courts, so that if, maybe Lieutenant Governor or Charles himself wanted to run again and thought this might be silly or got too much heat, he couldn't rescind it. It would have to go through a court system to explain why he wanted to rescind his citation. So, so again, I think the information went to the Historical Society in Great Barrington, but they were working with the Historical Society in Boston. And to your point earlier, when you keyed on it would have been out of the realm, one of the conversations I got a phone call saying that, well, we don't have anyone here who specializes in UFOs. If we were talking Boston Tea Party, we would have had the thing wrapped up in weeks, not years. And they did. It went to the Historical Society in Boston. But some of the members of the Historical Society were also witnesses to it, the local. So that's what I mean about the sightings and everything. Pretty much everybody knows in the area that this happens, it took place, but they couldn't induct it without the paper trail and the pillar standing of my father. That's why our family became the key person to get this inducted. So I think the historical, well, by the way, real quick. So I get a call from Debbie Auerman, the director of the Historical Society. She says, Tom, I think we're going to do this for our own selfish reasons. We're not coming here to see the latest musket ball. So I knew at that point there was an alternative motive to get this inducted, because they wanted to do something with it, because a lot of people had seen it, knew about it, but they just didn't have enough source documentation to pull the trigger on it and get it passed. But at the same time, they didn't want to be the only one out there being a laughing stock and worry about losing their job over it. So they had to work with the Historical Society in the Boston area and then get the governor to seal it. So they focused on the restaurant and how our restaurant divided the community. And like Billy the Kid altered the railroad, we altered the natural progression of our community. Therefore, it was historically true and easier to get someone else to rubber stamp their decision.
Tom, where did the idea for UFO Monument Park come from, and how did you and the folks that helped you make it a reality? It's such an unusual situation.
I had nothing to do with it. If you read there's this really pissed off little reporter by the name of Terry Cowgill, who I threatened to sue for it, but he and my father never liked each other. And so he was working for a local paper there for a while. He wrote a bunch of things that wasn't true. First he says, I built the monument. I'm going to build a 5,000-pound monument and somehow get it to Massachusetts, 1,000 miles away, and put it on private property. I would have been in jail for that, right? Of course I didn't do that. So the monument, or marker, it was originally going to be a marker for my father. And locals passed a hat to get something made. And unfortunately, it wasn't the most attractive piece. And even though the town itself moved it into place with I've got the letters. I'll go to my website, ufopark.org. You can see all the correspondence about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the town moved it into place. And then after they saw how big it was, they thought it was an eyesore. because it was pretty big. I think you saw it. It was huge.
Yes.
So when the people who built it said, "Do you mind? Would like to pass the hat and do something nice for the Reed family?" Sure, sure, sure. Well, I think they were thinking of like a little something in the ground, or they didn't expect this 5,000-pound monument. The reason it had to be big is because where it is private property, but it's also marshland, and you can't, and farmland, that's deemed farmland, and you can't pour a permanent structure in farmland because they get tax breaks. So it had to be heavy enough that it couldn't be stolen.
Interesting.
Yeah. So then they moved it, and then they still didn't like it, and then Louis Morneau, the movie director who produced Bats or directed Bats with Lou Diamond Phillips and worked with James Belushi in the movie. Oh my God, it was a time travel movie. And A Werewolf, the Beast in London. I think that was A Werewolf, A Beast Among Us. Louis Morneau, the movie director. I went to school with his brother. So his brother and I grew up together. And so I was flown to LA, went to Pete's Coffee Shop. I'm sure you've been there. And had as a chain out there. And he went public with his interest in doing a movie or a film about our case when the book is done, which I can't for the life of me finish. And so with that, his brother, who was an artist, once the monument was taken, they communicated with each other, flew me out to LA. He wants to do the film, so he wanted his family's name in the park. So they donated the sculpture, which you've seen, which has the circle on it. And then Ancient Aliens filmed and gave me a check or donation to the park. Instead of giving it to me, they gave it to the park. And we had those discs made, which went in this thing, so it kind of looks like a sun,
yes,
or like a UFO or whatever. And now, so movie director Louis Morneau, who is pretty big, now has his personal family's name in our park. And of course, B.B. King's daughter, Rita King, sponsors a bench. Ben Hansen has one there, where Travis has one there. Ancient Aliens, donated again the piece for the sign. Netflix. So it's growing in a way that it's not for me. I don't live there. I live 1,000 miles away from the park, but I wanted a judgment-free spot. My mother, a judgment-free diner. You want to talk about UFOs or whatever? Have at it. My mother was very open-minded. It's judgment-free. The park is judgment-free. Talk about whatever you want. This is a place of solitude. This is a place where you should be able to discuss anything. And it's sponsored by some pretty heavy hitters who feel the same way. And it's not just for UFOs. It could be your preference in anything. Sure. But this is a judgment-free spot. And I'm proud to be part of those who put it together. The land was donated to me, leased to me as a burial site. That's the only reason I have access to it. However, I still have got to make sure that there's nothing in there that could cause an accident. I can't have benches that are too light that could fall over. A child could get hurt, because I'm not the one that would be held accountable. Sure. Pine Island Farms would. And so I have to be really respectful to Pine Island Farms. Absolutely. And why everything that goes in there has got to be chained down. It can't be a permanent fixture. And they have to be UL listed and things of that nature. And of course, now there was a $10,000 telescope donated in honor of Stanton Friedman.
Oh, how nice.
I think I sent you a picture of that, actually. You should have that. I sent it to you the other day. The little girl standing on a telescope. That was donated in honor of Stanton Friedman.
Wow.
Did you get that? You should have had it.
I don't think that came.
It was okay.
Anyway.
But now, if you go back, you'll see this huge telescope in Stanton's honor.
And it's weatherproof. I mean, it can anybody can look through it.
No, it's an outdoor, commercial, full-blown telescope. It's huge. I mean, it's like this round. I mean, it's massive.
I guess that certainly wasn't installed back when I visited.
No, it's recent. It was just put in last fall. And so this is how that came. You want to hear how? I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to. We got 10 minutes?
Yeah. Well, no.
Okay, it used to be on top of a hotel in Disney. And it was leased by Disney from a company in Mississippi. And so they sent it back to Mississippi to get a new one. And a friend of mine, someone we both know, I'll tell you later, decided I would like to do something in honor of Stanton because he passed and he was friends with very close friends with Stanton. And so he had it refinished. They did beautiful white, most the lenses, they did the whole thing. So he bought it refurbished, and it was still, I think it was $7,400. And then I had to have backhoes come in and install it. They had to dig up the ground. And that is a permanent fixture. They allowed that one because it's a beautiful piece, and the town's like, yeah, sure, you can do that. you know what I mean? And so it's got a platform you stand on. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful. And I'm really so it's becoming like a memorial park too. You know, those people who have matter of fact, Stevie Ray Vaughan's Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother Jimmy from the Fabulous Thunderbirds, his son Tyrone, worked with Rita King, the daughter of B.B. King, to do something as well. And so now the park is actually sponsored by the family of Stevie Ray Vaughan, B.B. King, Netflix, Travel Channel, Ben Hansen, Travis Walton, you know, even Steve Bassett played a part in. And so we got to get you in here, Peter. It'd be my honor to have you. We'll do something for you. You live in the area anyway. We're having an event there June 14th. I'm having Jimmy Bell, who toured with Joan Jett there. I'm having a drummer from Dokken, BJ Zampa. Who else do you know who's coming? Some guy, one of them from Ancient Aliens. We got to lock that down. But we're going to be having a free to the community park on its 10th year anniversary of the park being established.
Great.
Yeah.
As I mentioned in the introduction, you are not a liaison, but you are an advisor, a go-between for, was it Fox and the UAP hearings that are irregularly going on in the House right now?
All right. I talk to Tim quite often, more or less text. He texts me on Christmas, Merry Christmas, that kind of thing. Again, because I knew him when he was mayor.
I see.
And my father was mayor, and his neighbor gave me the polygraph test, and I passed. So I'm kind of like I'm kind of like a friend, and he talks with me a lot about numerous things. But again, as far as Fox goes, I've been on Fox, I don't know, 4 times, I think. And I've been on News Nation a few times. But the funny thing is about that is, like, I like everybody else. I go out to happy hour. I'm social, right? I drink a little bit. Come on, and I'll get a call. This is God's honest truth. I was called at like 6 o'clock. Hey, this is so-and-so, Fox News New York. How you doing? Is this Tom? Yeah, it is. Would you mind going on around 7:30 Jesse Waters? And I'm like, yeah, but I just knocked back 5 rum and cokes. I'm munching on some wings. I've got some spinach dip, right? Susie's with me or whatever. I'm like, I got to go home, pound some coffee, right? Because you got to be at your best. But I'm not going to say no, right? You're not going to say, oh, no, I'm buzzed. You know what I mean?
At this point, just because of your experience, your involvement, any intuition or any thoughts on whether or not we are going to see major advances in the disclosure process over the next year or so?
Well, like a drippy faucet, I don't think that any major announcement's going to come from our U.S. government willingly, nor NASA, because they're government funded and they don't want to lose their funding. But with let's face it, with SpaceX and those other privately funded organizations, they're going to beat NASA to the punch. And here's another thing: NASA wasn't getting those billions and billions and billions of dollars because they weren't producing anything. They know a lot more than they've shared. And if I've got those documents that clearly show that in the 70s that we were being visited, there were pilots from Mexico. You saw that one of the documents. I've got a stack like this. They know damn well what's going on, or has been for a long time. And it's going to come out. Who divulges it first? I don't know, but it's going to come out. Now, is it going to come out in 12 months or so? I would say I give it 3 years before there's an absolute, maybe even sooner than that, but it's going to come out. and we're gonna all save a lot of face. The problem with that, Peter, is that they're not going to need you and me anymore.
Yes. All of a sudden,
we might as well just, play bingo and meet at the local VFW, right? I mean, they're not going to listen to us because now they're going to have their own speakers in place.
Their own instant experts who
here we're going to do this. You know how it is. So
it'll be interesting to see how that shakes down. We are actually at the end of our time here, Tom, and it really has gone fast. Give us the website of the Memorial Park so that that's where all the information is centered relative to what we've been talking about tonight.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so it's ufopark.org, ufopark.org, or berkshiresufo.com, which is BERKSHIRES, UFO.com. Even I misspelled that one. So berkshiresufo.com, which is why I bought them both, or ufopark.org. And
Thom Reed,
I can't thank you enough. And please give Race my best. And thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
And a pleasure having you on the show, Tom. For our listeners and viewers, stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and look forward to seeing you next week. Over and out for now.